And my story is similar to yours, Stephen. I chose not to litigate. My daughter at 12 years old said she wanted to stay with my ex. And for a year, I didn't see her, talk to her, really anything like that. And would have I made a different decision if I had known more facts, if I was more resourced, if I knew what was going on? I think I would. And like you're saying, I have compassion for myself. I did what I thought that was right. Hi, my name's Lawrence Joss, and welcome to the Family Disappeared podcast. Today we have part 4 in what not to do if you're an alienated parent or grandparent, and a wonderful second part of the conversation with Stephen and Anna, who are regulars, and then a really, really active part in the PAA community, which is Parental Alienation Advocacy. And then we have Parental Alienation Anonymous, which is our free 12-step program. All that information is in the show notes. And thank you for coming out today. If you're new to the community, just welcome. Stay a while, listen to some podcasts, come by, check out some meetings, check out the other resources that we have on our website, pa-a.org. There's some really great stuff, and so many new things coming on, and yeah, and a lot to look forward to. Please like, subscribe, let us know if you'd like anything different covered on the show, stuff you love about the show. Even let us know stuff that you don't like about the show. It's a great conversation to have. And in the show notes, we're going to start putting a survey. And if you can please take the survey, it's going to help us tailor the offerings for the nonprofit to folks in the community, so we can just be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive to what the community needs. And we're going to build this survey up over the next year, and every year we will resubmit a new survey just to keep current data. And I think it'll be incredibly useful and can be used in so many great ways for us and other communities. So with that, let's jump on into the show. So I got to say, one of the biggest things of what not to do is not to defer your agency and power to your ex-spouse. And we talk about this a little bit in the show. And for me, early on, when we were separated, I used to go to my ex to ask her about picking up my daughter coming back from college, or dropping off at the bus station, or doing different activities with particularly my oldest daughter, because I was alienated from her when she was 12 to 13. And then from 13 to 18, we had a relationship. And now it's back to, full alienation, estrangement, erasure, whatever you want to do it. But I used to go to my ex to ask her, thinking that she would do the right thing, but what I was really doing was having a lack of boundaries. Instead of going directly to my oldest daughter and having the conversations and asking for what I needed, and that's an interesting word, for what I would like to do with her, I was deferring that to someone else because had such a fear of abandonment. I was really centering in my ex in the conversation, even though it was about my daughter. It's a very odd behavior, but I would definitely not use my ex as a communication tool or triangulate it into a conversation if I had access. I would definitely go directly to my daughter, and I know I created a lot of harm by not doing that. And I'm thinking, yeah, my daughter must probably thought maybe I didn't care and felt abandoned and neglected and rejected. And I could have been a lot more skillful, but I believed that that was the right thing to do and the best thing to do at the moment. And thought that she had all the power, and I actually created that dynamic and gave her all the power. So I would not triangulate my ex into those conversations where possible. And when kids are young, it's not possible. When kids get older, and you do have a little bit of access, it is. And I definitely regret that. And it's a somber way to start the second part, but really, 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 really important. And yeah, let's jump in and see what Anna and Stephen have to say today. Anna, I'm gonna go to you for the same question that I started the show off with Stephen. Is there one thing in particular that really stands out to you, or what not to do, that you want to share a little bit about before I go into the other questions that I have?
I had 5 years of alienation where I wasn't part of the program. So I didn't have recovery at that point. I didn't have a community. I didn't know what I was doing. And again, my default position normally is to retract and to pull myself away and to contract. And so at the beginning, I did a few things around the kids where I kind of, if I'm thinking about it now, I tried to force myself into their space. was going to say it didn't work, but it was mixed. If I think about it now, it's thinking about the splitting piece too. It was even then I went to some scenarios. One was a graduation where I ended up staying even though no one was there. No one in my family was there. My son didn't go. And I even remember thinking at the time, I'm not going to escape. I'm not going to flee out of this building because I feel like I'm a bad person. I've done the wrong thing. I'm going to sit and listen to his name being called, all those things. But what happened probably on the back of that was that I decided to really not force myself into their life because it felt like they were already under a lot of pressure. And the dynamic that I'd stepped away from, I knew how painful that was. And my image, and I don't know, this is only my perspective, was that anytime I tried to make my presence felt, things got worse for them. And so I pulled myself away, and I still sent emails. I tried to call, but that didn't work very well. So I tried to make contact. It was very much one-sided. It was very painful, but I had this underlying theme in my head that I didn't want to make things worse for them. And it's interesting thinking about this show and what not to do. I have mixed feelings about that, and you hear different stories, and I have lots of conversations with people. I still stand by that decision, but I also, what's coming up for me now is I wonder if that's really led to my kids feeling abandoned because I didn't reach out. It's a different perspective in recovery, and I don't get that time back. And again, I have compassion for my younger self. I really didn't know what to do, certainly without program or without a community. I didn't know what to do, and I wanted to fix things, and I wanted to save everyone. So it was a whole mixture of emotional. It was a big emotional cocktail going on. And I didn't want to hurt the kids any more than they were already hurting, but maybe I hurt them by not. I don't know. This is one of the questions. This is one of the conversations we sometimes have in meetings, and I sometimes have with people. That's why I'm finding this question hard to answer, because as I'm thinking about it, my removing myself from them, I told myself that it was to protect them. It was also to protect me, because it was so painful. I didn't know what to do. I didn't and don't have a good relationship with their father, and I felt like it was impossible for me, and the only way for me to survive that was to kind of contract. And it's interesting to think about that now, because it's nearly 8 years since I've had contact with them, and I still don't know what to do. I've done a lot of unpacking of a lot of the things that I have done in the past and what I'm trying to do going forward. So there's more balance, and the perspective is more balanced. But I think one of the reasons I'm feeling emotional this morning is that it's like, wow, this is this is a big container with lots of things to unpack and lots of things to pull off the shelf. And the more work I do, the stronger I become. But then the more the challenges kind of open up. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's such an emotional topic. And I don't know if I did the right thing by pulling back, but if I get the chance to talk to my kids about it at some point during their lives, during my life, it would be interesting to see how I answer that conversation with them, how I broach that conversation. That feels very convoluted, Lawrence. Sorry. I'm all over the place.
There's a lot in there, and I'm hearing the shame, the guilt, the confusion, what was right, what was wrong, you acknowledging you were taking care of yourself and you were trying to take care of the kids. And I also think the really important thing that you mentioned in there is that you didn't have community, you didn't have resources, you didn't have a lot of resiliency. And I completely relate to it, because I made all those same decisions. And I didn't have a community to talk about what was going on. There was no one that even identified what was going on. I was just trying to figure it out in real time. I didn't have the term parental alienation. I didn't understand any of the dynamics. So as you're talking about that, and as I'm thinking about, the time that my daughter told me not to come to prom, and then I didn't go to prom, and then 2 days later she's like, "Were you there?" You know what I mean? And there's been several instances where I've chosen not to show up at events because I was told not to be there. And if I was fully grounded and in my body and really present, would I have made a different decision? I don't know. I really don't know. Like, yeah, like I need to talk to my kids. But I think the thing and the nugget to take away, if you're listening to this, is be aware, am I present? Do I have resources? Do I have resiliency? Am I working on myself when I'm making these decisions and not making these decisions in a vacuum, which I think a lot of us do because we're going to resources that aren't present themselves. Like I went to my mom, my sister, and they weren't really present because they were angry and dysregulated and stuff like that. Even my friends. So it's such a complex question, and brings up so many different things. And Stephen, did you have any experiences or thoughts about decisions that you've made not to do something when you're not sure what that looks like or how that'll manifest later on in your relationships with the kids?
Yeah, as Anna was talking, I felt the chills go down both my arms, and I I feel like I can connect with what she was saying. I did that at the beginning. Again, this is 2013. There was no, there was no. I was not part of a support group. I didn't have support at that time. I was navigating this on my own, and I actually, um, for better or worse, my daughter was 13, going on 14, and I was told by my ex that she did not want to come see me. And so I actually let my ex, who was not, we were not in a good place at that time, make the decision for me about how I was going to approach um, the connection with my daughter. And my daughter said after that time, when she was younger, she said, "Yeah, I don't want to come to your place." And I chose at that time not to litigate that issue and not to put her in a position where what I thought was the best thing was not putting her in a position where she had to choose one of her parents, and would just allow that to happen so she was not forced to be put in the middle. And it has been mentioned since then, kind of the idea of, well, why didn't you fight for me? And that's it's I don't know that I ever come to the answer about, going back. I have compassion for the person at that time, that with myself, that was making those decisions in a vacuum, like you said. Um, I don't know that I ever, I want to hope that I fully come to peace with that at someday, and maybe I will when I have that discussion with her and I can, in person, own my faults, and where I may have made missteps and not made the right decision, what I thought was the right decision at the time. I don't know. It does feel like, to Anna's point, it does feel like a big mass of emotion and some shame and some guilt. And um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it other than there's those feelings there. And I don't know if I had made a different decision and litigated, I might have ended up in the same place, because there's people in our support groups that have done that, and they end up in a difficult situation with alienation anyway. So yeah, definitely. Sorry, that's long-winded, but
Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful and vulnerable answer, and also just like Anna was talking about, it's just so complex, and like what decision could I have made, and my story is similar to yours, Stephen. I chose not to litigate. My daughter at 12 years old said she wanted to stay with my ex, and for a year, I didn't see her, talk to her, really anything like that. And would have I made a different decision if I had known more facts, if I was more resourced, if I knew what was going on? I think I would. And like you're saying, I have compassion for myself. I did what I thought that was right. And this is going to lead into like the next question because it's completely related, and it's about boundaries, right? And in my family of origin, there were no boundaries. We all kind of like went through just like different waves. So, if you think about it this way, each person has their own hula hoop. If you have a boundary, you stay in your hula hoop. When boundaries are leaky or kind of sloppy, the hula hoops overlap, and this is like intersectionality in the hula hoops. And you can overlay many, many hula hoops so they're all intersecting. And in my family of origin, like there were no boundaries. Like we would drink together, party together, talk about, you know, our lives, sex, like whatever. Like it's just like it seemed really really wonderful and useful, and in a lot of ways it was really really beautiful. But what I'm thinking with my lack of boundaries, which is something that you said, Stephen, is I deferred a lot of my power to my ex-wife as we were going through a divorce and asking her opinion about the best way to connect with the kids, and then I triangulate her in because she had a closer relationship with my oldest daughter. And by doing that, that's really like my lack of boundaries, my lack of containment, and mine just kind of like leaking it all over the place. And that's what my kids saw. So why wouldn't they have those same relationships now? Like when I look at their relationships that seem like they're really enmeshed and stuff like that, I taught them that. Like I was part of that family system that taught them that. So my question is boundaries. Like where were your boundaries really leaky? Where can you track back on stuff that you wouldn't have done because there was a lack of boundaries, or you would have done something differently because there was a lack of boundaries? And let's start with you first, Anna.
Wow, that's a big question, Lawrence. My story is not dissimilar to you. I grew up with in a family system with no boundaries. They weren't modeled for me. I didn't know how to have them, and my relationships were very codependent. So I lived vicariously through other people, and I brought that into my marriage, and I brought that into how I raised my sons, and I lived very much through them. And I deferred to my ex-husband all the time. I was a people pleaser. I still struggle with being a people pleaser. So I very much modeled dysfunction for them. So it really resonates with me what you're sharing about this is how I expect my kids to try and to navigate their own lives at the moment, because it's all that they know. I came into my marriage and into motherhood with dysfunction because that's all that I knew. I didn't know how to do any different. And it's interesting. It's the boundaries piece is challenging for me now because I'm so accustomed to not having them, and I'm accustomed to not having a voice, and I'm finding my voice in recovery. And part of this is going off way off on a tangent, but I feel like I get to model boundaries for my kids even though I don't have contact with them now. I'm practicing boundaries in my new relationships that I don't have a relationship with my kids, but the relationships I have from this point forward that I've had since I've started recovery work, I definitely have boundaries in place, and it's challenging, and they feel wobbly, and I move forward with them like a bull sometimes, and then I pull back and I go back into my shell. But I'm learning how to navigate those spaces and feeling the growth that comes with that, and at the same time realizing how lacking I was in boundaries and how that was not healthy for my kids. And it's making me think of how I tried to defend them in my marriage. And for me, the boundaries piece gets mixed up with me wanting to save and me wanting to fix. And I was trying to fix other people, and I wasn't working on my. So that again, that feels messy. Is challenging for me. It was challenging for me. But how did I know how to do anything different? I didn't know how to. So, but it contributed to the dysfunction for sure, and it's something that my kids are going to have to work through as they continue into their young adult life. And I hope they have the opportunity. I hope they are able to surround themselves with people that will guide them onto a healing path, and a path where they get curious and where they try and make these discoveries rather than being trapped the way I felt like I was for many, many years of my life. So I don't know if that answers the question at all, but yeah, these questions are, yeah, very involved, and this is very emotional stuff.
Yeah, they're definitely big questions, multi-tiered and deep, and they go sideways and backwards sometimes, forward sometimes, and again, like you said, something really interesting about boundaries that's really important, because a lot of times, like we're like very clear with the boundaries, like no, I don't want to talk to you, no, I don't want to have plans with you today. But the other part of the lack of boundaries is the fixing that you alluded to. And when I'm trying to fix someone, I'm jumping in their hula hoop with them, you know what I mean? And that's not cool. Like, can you imagine two people in a little hula hoop, if you want to just use that as a visual? You know what I mean? Like, that's uncomfortable. Like, you're inundating, you're in people's space, and they don't get an opportunity to really figure out stuff for themselves. So this boundary leaking and this boundary, these boundary violations, you know, they happen all the time. So that's really rich, and there's so much to discuss there. And what about you, Stephen?
Yeah, I was thinking of when you were talking about the leaky boundaries, and at first I was like, Well, I was taught in my family of origin to be 100% conflict avoidant, so I didn't have boundaries. But the reality is, what you just mentioned again about kind of like stepping into other people's hula hoops, right? Which is a leaky boundary, and I was also doing that. So on one hand, I was conflict avoidant, but then I would, and this is pre alienation, but it ties into it with my ex especially is um, like the kind of the picture I have in my brain is a prize fighter that's not willing to step into the middle of the ring, right? So I'd be dancing around the outside like this, let's say the smaller boxer fighting, Muhammad Ali or some, whatever, and I'm dancing around trying to run around the circle around to avoid getting punched in the face, and then every once in a while I try to sneak in a jab. So that's what I had the visual I had in my head of the sneaky boxer who's going to get crushed eventually, but every once in a while tries to jump in and step outside of my hula hoop and throw a punch at somebody's face and then run around again and try to avoid getting knocked out. So, but yeah, I was so conflict avoidant and had such poor boundaries based on personality makeup, family of origin, life experiences, whatever, that when things happened in my marriage relationship and I wasn't in a great place to own my part, yet also have a boundary about what behaviors aren't okay related to the kids and alienation and yeah, it was really really messy, and I have much better boundaries now and would probably do it differently, so I can again I can have compassion for that person who really just didn't wasn't taught how to set boundaries, had boundaries, violated as, in certain ways as a young person, and then realizing that I'm in a I'm in a different place now. And actually, it's funny when I think about it because Anna and I were talking about this recording, and I was just thinking how great her boundaries are now because I was like, well, I don't think I can do it on June 22nd. I need to run my meeting, and she was like, well, we're gonna go ahead with our June 22nd taping of the podcast anyway. And I was like, oh well, okay. Let me think about this. Maybe and then the great thing was it was a beautiful boundary. It was actually really wonderful. And then I got to think about what do I want to do with my time today. And I was able to get somebody to take over my show because I or my meeting, not the show, take over the meeting that I typically run. So that I was able to be here. And that's the decision that I wanted to make. It wasn't forced on me. I just got to think about, okay, well, what's my boundary? And it was a beautiful thing. So anyway, that just came up just now thinking about that. So yeah.
I love that. And the way that we learn about boundaries is other people role modeling it. And a lot of us, as we said, didn't get that in family of origin. And that Anna was able to role model that for you. You were able to actually take that in and understand what was happening and then make a decision for yourself. Like, this is what recovery is about. This is what community is about. And the PA community is wonderful, rich, and loving. And there's other communities too. There's other resources too. This is just the resource that we happen to be talking about and using right now. And I also just want to say this one other thing about boundaries, which we didn't really touch on, is I set walls and I have boundaries. So a wall is impenetrable and you can't get over it or around it. So I think a lot of us get confused. And I know I got confused really early on. I had really rigid walls and I thought I was having boundaries. And then a boundary is something that's pliable, movable, negotiable, changeable. It's not static. We get to decide where we are each day and make a different decision. Kind of like on the level that Stephen was saying at first, it's like, hey, no, I got a meeting I need to take care of. And that was his boundary. And Anna had a different boundary, and then she let him know what it was. And then he's was pliable. So he was able to work with it and move it. And if he just had a straight no, that is not a boundary, that's a wall. So I think that's a really important distinction for us when we're working with our kids. And I'll also say this is not just about our kids, it's about every relationship in our life. It's about work, it's about our next door neighbor, it's about the grocery clerk, and it's about everyone. So even though we're talking about it in the context of our kids a lot, it's not about them, it's about us, and it's about every relationship. So great conversation. And I'm going to see, Anna, do you have a little happy story, somewhat story that you want to share before I jump into the next question?
I do, Lawrence. I have a cute story that I came up with after being triggered by the question initially. And it's from when my kids were really little. It's interesting how my mind goes back to like they were 4 and 2, something like that, I think. And there were lots of happy times when they were little, and I was lucky enough to be a stay-at-home mum, so I got to do lots of things with them. But this one thing that I was thinking about was where, as a family, it was at the weekend, we went to, there's a town south of us that has a corn festival. This particular town is famous for their sweet corn. And I like doing things that are a little bit offbeat, if you consider that offbeat or not. And it was, we showed up early in the morning and it was a lot of fun. They had outdoor plays, they had a midway, they had different craftsmen selling different things. They had activities for the kids, but the highlight of the festival, which I didn't realize what that quite would be like at the end of the day, they had a competition where you came along with a pair of overalls, and the bigger the better. And I didn't understand what that meant, but you, if you wanted to enter this competition, and they had a huge mountain of corn, and for, I don't know what it was, like 2 minutes, you stuffed your overalls with corn. So as much as you could stuff into your overalls, you got to take home, and the take that home. And so that, it was bizarre. Like, it was a very small, a rural town, very low key, very relaxed. Like, I liked the energy there. And all of a sudden there was this frenzy of all these farmers and these kids or whatever with these massive, great overalls pulling. And I was watching my kids watching these guys, and they're going, what is, like, their little faces, it was just so cute. And this it was just, it was a simple thing, it was a silly thing, and people were, they looked like the Michelin man stuffed with all of this sweet corn that they probably have more sweet corn than they know what to do with, because they live in this community, so why do they want more sweet corn? But it was just, it was really daft, and my kids were really wrapped up in it. And at the end of it, people walked away with it. There was still a mountain of corn, so the kids were diving into this sweet corn, and then they were pulling out their t-shirts and they were stuffing it with, and it was just, and I've got some really nice pictures of the kids doing this, and it was one of those instances, they were really in the moment. It was really daft, and it was a lot of fun. And as I'm sharing the story now, I can feel what my energy felt like then, and being around them. And it was a fun family activity, and we did have some fun family activities. So the back of me being triggered by you asking for a funny story is actually really, it feels lovely now, because it reminds me that there was some balance, that the stories are not all dark and the energy is not all dark. And I feel like I needed to be reminded of that, because when I go to talk about my kids, I can shrink, because it feels like it's all pain, and it's not all pain. So it's really beautiful to be reminded of that. And I've got that image in my head to carry throughout my day today, which is really cool. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that beautiful story, and also your reflection about the emotions, like looking for something good and amidst this pain, how that becomes the center, that becomes the North Star, and we just skip all these other wonderful memories. And I'll say again, because we're on video and you get to watch a video too if you choose, like watching your face light up, you're smiling, you look like a giddy little child telling this story is just so heartwarming and such a wonderful. Yeah, like we don't talk about a lot of these great stories. We talk about a lot of more serious stuff generally, and just to dive into that part of you and your kids is I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And so I have this other question that comes up, and we've got so many questions, but we're probably just going to get to one more, maybe two more, because we are running out of time. But if you have multiple children, was there like an issue, and still an issue, when you think about parental alienation and your struggle, where you kind of put the kids together as a monolith, that they're kind of like parental alienation, or they whatever the topic is, like instead of having the kids as separate, like they're all doing something as a crew, and like taking them all as one, instead of going and really understand that each kid is acting and dealing and showing up in different ways. Has that been an issue in the past and something you would change, or is that just a weird question? So let's go with you first, Stephen.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think early on, because there was so much tension between my ex and I relative to just, relationship, breakup of relationship, and then um, long sort of legal process to get from separation to divorce, that I think initially there was a tendency on my part to view that it was kind of like a them thing. It was my ex and my two alienated children together that were doing kind of this alienation thing. Like they were disconnecting from, and of course, this was when I was in that sort of it's about me thing too, so that factors in there. But yeah, that they were kind of in my mind. I think I had this thought that there was collusion and there was discussions and thoughts and plans about how this was going to go, and to be honest, there may be some of that. I don't know that I'll ever know that. I'm guessing based on some interactions that there was some discussions about one-sided discussions about facts and things, but um yeah, so originally I would say that's where I was, and as things moved along and I did more of my recovery, I was able to tease that out and realize that each person, both my children and my ex, they're all individuals. They have their own story, they have their own perspective, they have their own family trauma or lack thereof, and it became much easier as I did more work, I would say, on myself, realizing that and I think being in some of the recovery rooms, realizing that every story is different, that helped me to realize that each story, the parts of each story are different too. So my daughter's experience being 5, 6 years older than my son is a completely different experience, and the context of the alienation was completely different. And time of life when the separation and divorce occurred, which triggered that. Uh, or started that ball rolling. Yeah, that it's all different and it was all a very unique experience to each person. And I can have a lot more compassion, and also it gives me a lot more compassion for my son and daughter and for their own uniqueness, and not also attaching them to my ex, which I think is a big mistake that I made and that I know others make too, is sometimes attaching actions of our exes to our children, which was really not good for me as far as my being able to stay in a real centered place with my children. So yeah, definitely, and it's been a great learning for me, and now I have a very individual approach to each of my children based on where they are and where they are with their development and their sort of their own expressions of desire for connection or lack thereof.
Mm. Yeah, so I'm hearing that early on it was a little bit more difficult to separate out the kids because there was so much coming at you, and it just felt like it was them versus us, and you were just othered and in a silo by yourself, and then there was a real struggle. And then you also said something interesting that I just want to ask you a follow up question on. You said some of your ex's actions you thought were the kids' actions too or behaviors too. Can you just give us one kind of example? Because you said you regretted that, but what specifically were you talking about?
So, for example, knowing some of the verbiage that my ex would respond to me with about, let's say my faults or so I was, directly told multiple times that I was a narcissist, and to the point where I actually did, you know, counseling work and consulted with, friends and family members, and asked people, really, really to be brutally honest with me and share if I was, actually had a narcissistic personality disorder, and I got great feedback that yes, there's moments where you maybe do some really selfish things, which is true for all of us, but that you're definitely not a narcissist. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be asking these questions, and you wouldn't be doing, uh, counseling work to figure out your part. So anyway, having that verbiage that had come my direction, and then hearing in letters that were written or conversations, having those terms used, directed my children, more one than the other, was difficult at sometimes, because I would kind of would picture that this is not the verbiage that uh, you know uh, a 14 or a 16-year-old child would use. This is coming from somewhere else. And so sometimes it was hard to separate that out. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so you would get a letter or some kind of communication, and it would be languaging that your ex would use, and then you'd convolute it that this was actually your child, and you weren't able to separate out your child's experience. And coming back to the empathy and the way we started with the show, you weren't able to maintain your speed limit. You split off a little bit in some of those moments, and they all just became one. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I would say to sum it up kind of like that, it was like I couldn't separate and go, wait, hold on a second. I realize that this language is not coming from my child. This is coming from somewhere else, but still take what, what was valid from, say, a written communication or a text or whatever, um, and then just drop the rest. I couldn't just drop the rest. I would sit there and go, I get upregulated about, okay, now this is obvious. Now this person is talking with them and sharing information that shouldn't have been shared, and all these kind of things that come into your head. And yeah, I can separate that out, and it doesn't happen as much anymore either. My kids are a little bit older now; they're all over 18. So, but yeah, absolutely, exactly what you said.
That's cool, and it's really interesting how it's tying in most of the topics that we're talking together. The understanding of empathy, the cutting off, the splitting at parents too. When we get something that's dysregulating, and then we kind of like lose ourselves and can't discern what's really going on, and the monolith of the kids, like they're all part of the same thing, and you can see how complex the mechanism is, where everything's leaning into everything and putting pressure in different directions, and one thing moves, and then another domino falls. It's just fascinating. And Anna, what about you on the idea of the kids as a monolith? Was that ever a theme, or can you tie something into it based on the conversation?
I can definitely tie in the sense that what Stephen's describing resonates with me. And I hadn't really realized until we were talking this morning about splitting too. I'm definitely split. I do go into splitting because in terms of, it's not so much now because I don't have any contact with my kid's father or with my kids. But at the beginning, I was splitting because the information that I heard about them didn't feel like it was their voice from the beginning. And that was based on my experience of living in the same household. So thinking about it, I didn't pay very much attention to what was being said because I didn't think it was real. I didn't think it pertained to my kids necessarily. And I was protecting myself, I think, emotionally, and a lot of it was abusive too, right? So it was hard to pull out those threads, but did it, I think, all at the same time, I was able to separate it. I didn't attach any of that stuff to my kids as individuals or as two brothers. I had a separate feeling about them, a separate relationship with them, even though it felt like it was very damaged at that point, and it still is. Um, I compartmentalized, I think, is what I did. Over the years, when I've reached out to them, I always do that in a separate kind of way. I never send them things that would be together. Or I don't refer to one of them in a conversation with the other. I'm very careful to keep that separate. And I think it was, as I was thinking about these questions, one of the reasons I do that is because as a child, I wasn't treated as an individual. So I have a big wound, my own personal wound around that. And I don't want to be clumped in together with the rest of my biological family. And that's how we were all boundaryless and all homogenous, and it was revolting and it was very hard to live with. So I've tried hard in as much as I've been able to reach out, which has been limited and very one-sided, to not treat them as one unit. But it's been challenging from the beginning. It hasn't. I felt the disconnect started right away, and it continued with the communication, which felt very distorted to me. And so I had an understanding of that at the beginning. It also probably was a bit of a bias, and it's probably again, it's not the whole picture, and it's interesting to listen to people talk in meetings and conversations that I have to get, again, a different perspective. So I soften that, so it's not that black and white thinking, but it's challenging, and it's really challenging. I don't hear their voices, so I don't know what their experience is, and I don't know whether they feel like they've been abandoned or they feel like they're not individuals and that they're, yeah, it's an interesting, really interesting question.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it is fascinating, and we might not get information, or we might have information, but it's really interesting to point that out when parental alienation, estrangement, erasure, whatever word you want to use, starts generating energy in its own velocity, then everyone kind of gets sucked into that vortex, and it all just looks like the same thing, at least to me. And I'd say for me, a lot of the stuff that I would share with my daughters would be something to the degree like, hey, like this has happened with your sister, and I want to talk about it. And like I split off, and I want to know that my youngest daughter's not going to leave me the same way that my other kids left me, in a similar way. And we have conversations now and then around it. And I, a lot of times after the conversation, I need to make an amends because it's really not appropriate. But what's really happening for me is I'm having a lack of boundaries. I'm splitting off. I'm not really present. I'm not really thinking about her. I'm just really thinking about my abandonment and my fear. And then I take these conversations in a wonky way, and I throw her into a soup with her sisters. And it's interesting because her answer is always the same time. She's like, I'm not my sisters. I'm not my sisters. And I think over time that maybe parental alienation forces them into just being that one monolithic energy that parental alienation will bring, even though it's not necessarily her behavior and her actions behind it. And yeah, that's another whole show. Let me just skip that. I'm gonna share a quick funny story. We're gonna take a last couple words from everyone, and we're gonna call it a wrap. So I remember taking my two youngest daughters up north. I was living in Southern California, and we're going up to Northern California to visit my parents. And I'd always take them to the 99-cent store when we traveled, and we'd go and we'd buy as much crap as we could, water balloons, art stuff, whatever, to get. And then we went to like a Rite Aid or a CVS, and came up with a great idea to me to dye my youngest daughter's hair. She must have been 5 or 6, and we're going to dye it blue. So we're staying at a motel, and we dye her hair blue, and her hair is blue, her scalp is stained, her hands are blue. And then we start up blowing balloons, and we're having water balloon fights outside. And my one daughter throws a water balloon at my other daughter. It misses her, and it hits the window for the other people's room that they're staying in. But the window just has the screen, but the window's open, so all the water goes into this people's room, and they're like upset, and we're just like these yeah, it was really, really funny. Looking back on it, it was quite obnoxious, and but it was a really fun moment. And then her hands and her hair were stained for like weeks, which was I think we called her Smurfy or something for the trip, which was really funny at the time. But that's my funny story. And we ran out of time, and we have so many questions we didn't even get to. So you're each going to have, say, 30 seconds or so. Is there any last things you'd like to say about what not to do from anything that you thought about, that can be pretty concise and pretty clear? Like, I did this, not so great. I wouldn't do that for myself in the future. Or you can just say thank you, and you're done if you don't have anything that jumps right up at you. So Anna, let's go with you first.
What's coming up for me, Lawrence, is and it's what I've learned in the community and doing recovery, is to pause before you do anything. And I'm thinking about the communication or the contact. Pause and get advice, and less is more. And I've tried to do that certainly with my own kids. I don't always succeed, and I don't always succeed in it in my other relationships too. It's a balancing piece that I'm learning in recovery, but I didn't know how to pause at the beginning, and I didn't want to. I wanted to be upregulated. My nervous system was used to that, and I'm really learning how to stay in that space. And that impacts how I connect and try and connect, again, as you've pointed out, with everyone in my life, not just my kids. And it's really valuable advice. And if I feel myself spinning, I know I need to pause, because I'm not going to make good decisions when my head is spinning. So that would be my final thought, I think, for today.
Wonderful. So I'm hearing, if you're feeling reactive, if you're feeling upregulated, pause, don't respond from that place. Take a moment and reach out to other folks in your community that aren't upregulated or that aren't pushing an agenda, and check in with someone to get some maybe useful, energetical, and cognitive input that might be valid. That's great. I love that one, Anna, and so useful for all of us. And your last thought of what not to do, Stephen. Do you have something for us?
I have something, but it's not going to be a whole lot different than what Anna just said. Maybe just a slightly different phrasing of it. But I was having a discussion with somebody in program the other day, and we were talking about the idea that maybe at the core of recovery is the idea of patience. patience with ourselves, patience with our children, patience with others, and that maybe that is a foundational thing for all recovery, but specifically from parental alienation or estrangement. So I would say, agree with Anna that, just that having that patience, being able to step back and think and not react. And then secondly, getting resourced, not expecting people who are unresourced to resource us. Not going to people who don't understand alienation or estrangement and expecting them to be able to support us where we are. That's foolhardy at best and sort of unfair to those individuals. But then finding support and resourcing through meetings, through whatever means, support programs, connecting with friends and people who are resourced and who do understand, is I don't think I would be where I am right now without that. And it's such an important thing. It allows me to not be alone and not be an island and not be dealing with this by myself. So yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. And I love that you brought the word patience into it. And I just want to say this, that sometimes time takes time, and the patience or the pause lets stuff evolve and change and move through our system. And something that seems incredibly, incredibly important today, tomorrow will shift. And I'm going to share this tiny little story and we're going to be done. But I had this letter to my ex wife in the middle of it and with all this pain. And I wrote this letter and I was going to go take it to her house and this was going to solve and fix everything. And I went to my sponsor and read the letter because I had enough recovery to know just to read something to someone else. And he's like, huh, interesting letter. He's like, let's make a deal. You're going to leave the letter with me and you're going to come back tomorrow morning and let's reread the letter and see if it's useful to send. And I'm like, it is useful to send. This is it. This is the holy grail. This is the silver bullet. This is going to fix everything. He's like, yeah. I hear that. You're excited, but let's check in tomorrow morning. So I go home, I sleep, I come back, we read the letter. I'm like, ooh, I'm nuts. And that's the patience and the pause. Like there's such a need to get this solved and fixed so quickly that God, so many mistakes have been made. So I love that. That's what we're going to finish, is what not to do. Don't be impatient. Anna, Stephen, thanks for coming out and playing for a little bit. Love your insights, your recovery, your dedication to show up to support other people in the community and to share your experience. Thank you so much. And I hope you both have a beautiful day. Wow. And a wow. That was a fantastic show. And literally, I think I got through maybe a third of the questions, and there are so many more nuances to discover, uncover, discard, talk about, laugh about, cry about. And I really love the richness of the show and the recovery that these two beautiful people are working on, and how our community is just so rich and robust. And it's a lot of work. You know what I mean? I say this often, that this work's not for people that need it, it's for people that want it. And the wanting is, you're going to have to do the work and look at yourself, and there's a freedom in that, and there's a freedom in understanding all these nuances that we're talking about, and it's really life affirming, and it really takes off a lot of that pressure. If you feel like someone's sitting on your heart and you can't breathe, the work's really useful. The 12-step community is really useful. There's other wonderful communities out there that are incredibly useful. And I also just want to say a thank you to Cindy Hirsch at ISNAF, which is another organization that's a nonprofit. We have an interview with her that might have shown or might be showing after this interview, and ISNAF is ISNAF, and she's the one that really started the conversation with me about us splitting off as parents, and some of the leaky boundary stuff came out of our interview. So I just wanted to acknowledge her wisdom that she shared with me, and give her credit for part of the conversation that we had today. And thank you for coming out and listening today. I really appreciate having you as part of the community. Please comment, send us an email, Parental Alienation Anonymous at gmail.com. You could do that if you want to know about the 12-step program, but at familydisappeared at gmail.com for the podcast. And comment, share, let us know. We're a community, we're learning. Everything we're doing is emergent. We want to keep adding resources and conversations that will be useful, and we need your input for that. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and there's a link in the show notes too. If you'd like to make a donation, we could really use it and appreciate it. And if not, everything is still going to remain free and accessible to everyone. So thank you for coming out to play today. And in case no one's told you yet today, I love you and have a beautiful day.